Masters Personae is the fourth full-length album from Yogyakarta, Indonesia-based death metal band Exhumation. This is a duo that formed back in 2008, and I guess we could qualify the death metal subgenre with 80s black death metal. We've got a little bit of thrash metal in there too. There's a very classic, indefinite sort of organic death metal feeling there that is not limited to the 1993 scope of things. So there's some modern touches, there's some very clear like 80s level stuff happening here, and all of it arrives with a serious aggressive energy that is focused on the riff as much as it is the hectic and chaotic kind of sound design and feeling of their work. There's a lot going into this record that is a progression available to their discography as a whole. So we should look back to some of their past releases for some precedents, but the big one is 11th Formulae from back in 2020. That release took them beyond that sort of deicide and Morbid Angel touched sound towards something that was better comparable to something like Obliteration. I think there was some early Dark Throne in terms of their death metal days influence in there too, and I would liken that sound to just a little bit of what Venenum were doing on their debut back in I think 2017 or so. This record takes that idea and runs with it a little bit further and makes it their own a bit more. You could still compare their sound to Obliteration. I mean, they've got Syndra on here guesting on one of the songs. They also have a couple of crucial additions for this record that I don't think were there before, and one of those is the lead guitarist from J Megs of Vile Apparition, an Australia-based band that you should know and appreciate. He was also in Suicide. Their full length was, again, a little bit underrated for its time, but we also have guest spots from folks like from Zom and Possession as well. So we're definitely in that realm of old school death metal influenced musicianship. We have some black death metal and thrash influences in there from the people that their cohorts or who are adding to this well curated event. What we get is a pretty pristine showing in terms of folks who are very well capable of representing this subgenre. That's going to be a hard thing to fully describe until we've cut to at least one clip here and got a sense of just the sound, the feeling, and the kind of the fury of this record. So throughout the course of this album, we'll get a sense that there is some influence taken from Bolzer early on, that black death metal permutation that preceded the Hero record. And then we'll also find the era of like Formulas of Death era Tribulation might come to mind. Although I would say maybe Execration and Black Death Horizon from Obliteration are probably a little bit clearer references to make in terms of the pace and the subgenres involved in what they're undertaking here. I think side A is on this record really is where the energy and the attack comes from. It really is where the over-the-top performances come in. It's where the vocals start to really stand out, and we get the energy of the band up front. And they don't really get fully weird with it, though there are some heavy rock influences that start to show up that differentiate their craft from those influences. So that's worth considering in terms of the parity between the sides here. Is that the first one is much more involved in keeping up that momentum and the energy. We get something a little bit different on the second half where we start to reach for a little bit more atmosphere, different song types, more exploratory pieces that slow down a little bit for the sake of doing something a little bit different. And it might seem like the energy is waning over the course of the record, but it feels like they've got plenty of riffs and energy in there still. It's just the first half is kind of an explosion of ideas and death metal rhythms in a very classic sense. What I think stood out for me is that the drum performances are quite exceptional. The vocals arrive with a lot of personality up front and kind of explore many different registers over time. We find that the record's destination isn't quite as important as its showing overall. I find that it loops pretty well, but by the end it's a little bit of an almost exhausted endpoint. So it wasn't that there was a flaw there in the full listen. It's just that they pack so much that is so active that even now I would have to, like, I'm having trouble recalling all of that happens on the record off the top of my head, even though I listened to it like 50 times. Big thing is that there's enough detail and energy here that if you're looking for something that amped up or did more than 11th Formulae did back in 2020, this is the record. You know, this is a very well curated, explosive follow-up to that record that it does even more. And I think I'm much more excited about this record because I felt like they could push it, and they did. And that isn't just the fact that they amped up the production values. They went with I think Subterranean Watchtower for the master, and it sounds better. It sounds more dynamic, but still sounds like that 80s death metal, black death metal sound. But their sort of heavy rock influences and stuff like that stand out even more because of that dynamic being allowed in, with some bass tones showing up a little bit more bright and whatnot. Otherwise, there's just, you could tell they've curated this thing in terms of its aesthetic. I think this is one of the stronger aesthetic pieces that I've come across this year. The album art is incredible. The insert is incredible. I'll have to break out the LP and look at it a little bit deeper in terms of the lyrics and whatnot. But you can tell this is a band that were willing to put in the time, the effort, and the money to make sure that this was a memorable thing. This was a substantial album. The biggest statement yet in their arsenal. I think that 11th Formulae was already to a very high standard. I was already impressed and a fan at that point. But this showed that they had further places to go with it. They had points to refine in it, and they put out their best record yet here. I think this is one of the best of 2024. And I think it's not always going to be that easy to put my finger on exactly the point where it broke through to me. I think all of these things, the aesthetic, the sound, the songwriting, the variety, and the flow of ideas, as rapid fire as it is, all come together for one of the best records of the year so far. Again, for me, that's a very high recommendation, a very worthy record. That's about as simple as I need to keep it. I think it's a fantastic record. It's an essential record, and I believe that will be my best of April this year. So check that out. Of course, again, a very high recommendation, released on April 26th. So you can check it out now. And if you'd like more of my thoughts in much more detail, go ahead and read the written review.